Okay guys, in this video what we're doing is looking at the structure of a nephron, right, which is the basic unit of filtration in the kidney, right, and we're looking at how it works, how it's structured, and how its structure helps it do what it does. Right, if we look in the kidney here, our kidney is actually, it is a nice kidney bean shape, that's why they're called kidney beans, and you can see it's got an outer layer and an inner layer, and that outer layer is called the cortex, and the inner is the medulla. Now that plays a really big role in the way in which this does work, because some of this stuff in the middle has a different salt concentration gradient, things like that. So what we want to look at is how this tiny little thing, this nephron, and there's about 1 million of them, a bit over 1 million of them in each kidney, how this filters the blood. Now what it's mainly trying to do is filter out is urea and waste products. Now urea comes from ammonia, and the ammonia is coming from the breakdown of all the proteins that we have in our blood and in our body. Anything that goes through this nephron is going to end up being discarded as waste, so coming out as urine. But the body says halfway through the process, hey, some of this stuff we actually need, and they will reabsorb it. Okay, so anything that comes out of this tube during this process will be reabsorbed by the body. And the way it does that is by having all these little capillaries wrapping all the way around this tube times 1 million, and it reabsorbs it, puts it straight back into the bloodstream. So you have to think of this as a very simple diagram of quite a complex situation. All right, let's start off. We've got the glomerulus, and what that is the blood vessel that comes into, kind of docks in here with the nephron itself. Now it starts off quite wide, and it kind of bottlenecks as it turns the corner. And what that does is pushes a lot of the fluid out, right? So the very first thing that's happening is that the fluid is being pushed out of the blood vessel, and it's going to be caught by this large Bowman's capsule here. It's like a big catcher's mitt. It's going to catch anything that is considered ready for filtration, right? So what's coming out of this is not our cells. There's no cells coming out of the blood. The majority of what's coming out of here is water, right? There's also some amino acids. Sometimes there's some glucose that comes out, some very small proteins. But all in all, it's mostly just salty water with a bit of extra being pushed in. Now the body is trying to osmoregulate. It's trying to regulate how much water it's putting out and keeping in. It's not so much about the salt concentration at the end, it's about the water concentration. So when you're dehydrated and you have that bright yellow urine, it's because there is less water in it, not necessarily that there's more salt. Okay, so the glomerulus is that blood vessel pushing out stuff into the Bowman's capsule, and then it will start to go through the proximal convoluted tubule. Now the very first thing that the body says is, hey, we need that glucose. We want to reabsorb it. We want to take it back. Hey, we need most of that water. We're going to take it back too. Okay, about 80% of the blood volume actually comes out here, but is almost immediately recaptured by the body. The body also needs to take back some of these ions as well, because it needs them for other things. And we've seen that, we know the neurons use them as part of the synapses, so it definitely needs to take them back. And we're going to keep calling that reabsorbed. Now that we've got this waste product going through our nephron, we're going to start calling it filtrate, because it's not urine yet, it's still going through the filtration process, so it is a filtrate. Now once it goes through that proximal convoluted tubule, most of the really important stuff has come out. Now what happens as it goes down the loop of Henle and then back up again is two things happen. Number one, it's going to change from the cortex into the medulla. So there's actually this imaginary line that is spanned by the nephron. Now as the filtrate comes down, it gets into this cortex, which is, I think I've messed that one up. No, sorry, you're wrong. It goes from the cortex and goes into the medulla. Okay, so ignore that. It's going into the medulla, and the medulla is incredibly salty. And because it's incredibly salty, what happens is that any water that is in the filtrate is going to be reabsorbed passively, right? It is simply following its concentration gradient and moving out of an area with a high concentration of water and moving into an area with a low concentration of water. So that's simply via osmosis. Okay. Now when the filtrate goes back up the loop, things change again because the body is still trying to recapture things that it needs. It is trying to recapture salts, right? So all those different ions we were talking about before, like the sodium, the potassium, the calcium. Now, because this area, this medulla, is very, very salty, it's hard to take up all these salts and reabsorb them. So this is happening actively, right? This is active transport by trying to reabsorb the salts. Pushing more salt into an already very concentrated area is going to require that extra energy to be used. Okay, so once the filtrate has now moved up into the distal convoluted tubule, proximal meaning close, distal meaning far away, we're talking about from the origin of the nephron, the same thing keeps happening, right? Over and over and over. We have more reabsorption of those ions, right? The sodiums, the potassiums, and all those kinds of things. And again, this is still having to happen as an active process. That energy is still needing to be expended because of this process. All right. So eventually, this filtrate will come down the collecting tubule. And in the collecting tubule, it is the last chance for the body to reabsorb water. And what's happening is it will send different signals. Now, if the body's going okay, then it'll be like, yep, fine, get rid of that water, make it a very dilute urine. If the flip side is happening and it's quite hot and the body says, no, we really need extra water today, then this is when it's going to come out. So it's that last possible chance for the water. There is only a very little amount of salt being taken out by this point. The collecting tubule is all about water reabsorption. Now what happens is this filtrate will go on into what's called the renal pelvis, which is this sort of central area in the kidney, and eventually it will be pushed out through a ureter and into the bladder, and then the bladder can urinate it out later. So this is a massive process. This is quite complicated, remembering that there are always tiny little capillary blood vessels wrapping around it, reabsorbing all these different things that the body needs over and over again.